Open up the depths of your heart to find eternity and live for more than your eyes can see. Give God the glory for all eternity.
What is a throne? Seems like an easy question to answer, but the concept actually has a lot of depth to it. Let's begin our study back at an actual reference to the throne of David in the Old Testament. Psalm 132, verses 11 through 12, seems to say it best. The Lord has sworn to David a truth from which he will not turn back. Of the fruit of your body I will set upon your throne. If your sons will keep my covenant and my testimony which I will teach them, their sons also shall sit upon your throne forever. So there would be a descendant of David who would occupy the throne of David. I can't think of any Bible believer I've ever known who would deny that. That wasn't just a promise made to David. It was actually a covenant that King Abijah called a covenant of salt in 2 Chronicles 13 and verse 5, meaning it was perpetual or unending in nature. But what does this mean? Let's talk about the word throne. The word throne sometimes refers to a piece of furniture. For example, 1 Kings chapter 2 and verse 19 says, "So Bathsheba went to King Solomon to speak to him for Adonijah. And the king arose to meet her, bowed before her, and sat on his throne. Then he had a throne set up for the king's mother, and she sat on his right." Now, these are obviously material pieces of furniture. And this is the way we usually understand the word throne, a place to physically sit down. But sitting on a piece of furniture called a throne is only significant if the person sitting there has a right to do so. After all, the cleaning lady can come in at night and sit down on the throne, but that doesn't mean she can make laws. When Solomon was anointed king, David set him upon David's throne. We read 1 Kings chapter 2 and verse 12, "And Solomon sat on the throne of David his father, and his kingdom was firmly established." In 1 Chronicles 29 and verse 22, we're also told that they anointed him as ruler for the Lord. Never forget that any time a king was anointed by God's design, he was considered a ruler for the Lord. So what we find in the final analysis is that Solomon was sitting on David's throne, for David said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who has granted one to sit on my throne today while my own eyes see it." 1 Kings chapter 1 and verse 48. And at the same time, Solomon was on the throne of Jehovah, which is clear because 1 Chronicles 29:23 says, "Then Solomon sat on the throne of the Lord as king instead of David his father." But Solomon was also said to be seated on his own throne. In 1 Kings chapter 1 and verse 47 we read, "May your God make the name of Solomon better than your name and his throne greater than your throne." So here's a riddle for you. How could Solomon sit on David's throne, Jehovah's throne, and his own throne all at the same time? The answer is when they are all the same throne. If we can't see that answer, it's because we aren't realizing that in all three instances, the throne belongs to God. These passages aren't speaking of a material piece of furniture. This is about the power to rule, which is what the throne symbolizes. This aspect is not far-flung or fanciful as some might claim. As the noted dispensational scholar John Walvoord wrote, "By the term throne, it is clear that no reference is made to the material throne, but rather to the dignity and power which was sovereign and supreme in David as king." We all agree it can be a literal piece of furniture, or the authority itself symbolized by the throne. So, which is it? Well, let me ask you this. Which was and is more important, the physical piece of furniture or the authority possessed? I believe we all would agree that it's the authority given by God. So let me end by answering a common argument that distracts from the truth on this same issue. The argument frequently made is probably best argued by Mark Hitchcock. He tells us that a valid contract demands that both parties understand its terms. Well, I won't argue with that. That's present day law, and seems that it must have always been true of contractual agreements in Bible days. Hitchcock argues that God must have been talking about an earthly material throne. Otherwise, the contract would be invalid, because that's what David would have understood. Mr. Hitchcock may have studied law, but his reasoning is flawed. If this were a contract with bilateral obligations, in other words, both parties had to do something in order for it to be valid, well, he would be correct. However, this is a promise. It's God's promise to David, and it was not a contract demanding that David do anything. The covenant that God made with David was a promise of divine intention. David did not have any obligations and therefore did not have to fully understand all or any of the details. The question of what the original hearers or readers would have understood is only valid if they were actually expected to fulfill obligations. Look at Jesus' statement or promise in Matthew chapter 16 and verse 28. There are some of those who are standing here who shall not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Those people were expecting the physical kingdom Mr. Hitchcock claims is still to come. Mr. Hitchcock says it didn't come in that way, which leaves the question, wasn't Jesus obligated to clarify the terms of his intention? Obviously, it didn't matter whether they understood anything about it. It was what Jesus was going to do, whether they understood or not.